Thank you, Stephanie, for taking the time and speaking. It's a pleasure to speak
Welcome.
to you. So I wanted to first walk through some of the works in the exhibition. You have three works in the exhibition, Seen and Unseen, at B7L9, and Building a Home with Time, the Encounter of the First and Last Particles of Dust, and Moon Gold.
Mhm.
So I was hoping that we could take a little bit of time to take a look at, each one of the works and sort of discuss a little bit about them. And then I was also thinking of going into sort of a couple of questions about process and themes that relate the works to the exhibition. So yeah,
Yeah.
so maybe we can start with Building a Home with Time.
So building a home with time. If you look at my let's say there are two works that have this title.
Mm.
This one that you have on show on view now, and another one which I made previously. The first one is a construction. So it's a work in which I'm not involved myself in the making. I give instructions to builders, and they use a specific number of bricks to construct this little room, let's say. And the number of bricks is 2,832. So it corresponds to a number of days, the number of days between my birth and the end of the civil war in Lebanon. For the second version, because of course the first one is quite bulky, it cannot always be shown. It's a room in which you can enter and you can get a sense, let's say, of this period of my childhood and the history of Lebanon in a very abstract way. Now, in the other version, the one that you are showing right now, it's the number not of bricks, but of beads that correspond to this number of days. Um, and then you have beads of a regular size, let's say, but they're a little bit big. They're 1 centimeter of diameter, and they're what it usually children could play with. Anyways, as a child, I was used to making children jewelry with that kind of beads. So they're wooden beads. They're in provenance from a factory in Germany that closed. So I managed to get a last stock, let's say, of beads. I managed to get that number, but there was not much more. It closed because the beads are currently produced in China, of course, because it's cheaper. But yeah, it's also the end a bit of an era. So you have a necklace which is not unusual, let's say, in its size, but its length is unusual, of course, because it contains this very big number of beads, and it's installed. So it's not worn, and then it can take the shape of other objects such as an abacus used to count time, a prayer, or yeah, or something to pass time, to count, to pass, or to count prayers even. But this is not my intention behind the work, of course. This is only what people told me, the way they interpreted, the public interpreted the works then. Then the reason why I was interested in this number of days is because I had noticed that as a Lebanese artist, I'm always introduced, maybe you would say that as well in your introduction, as being born in the midst of the civil war, which for me was a very banal fact. And very uninteresting, because when you're born in a situation, whatever the situation is, it's very normal to you. So I wanted to insist more on the parallel between my childhood, so a sweet period in life. It's not always for everyone, but I mean, that's how we usually see it, and that was the case for me. And a very harsh period, a very tormented period of the history of my country. And the fact, I mean, I noticed that they also ended at the same time. So the end of childhood is, of course, a cultural concept. It's not an established fact, and it varies according to cultures. But we could say that the age of 9, which is more or less the number of these beads in days, correspond to more or less 9 years. We could say that it's a time when childhood could end. You could consider that it ends then. And so it was the end of that very happy, sweet period, in parallel with the end of this, a hard event in Lebanon, conflict. So I wanted to approach this period of my life that I shared with the country's history, and to offer it to visitors, to viewers, again, in a very abstract way. So it's not a space that you can experience this time, it's an object, but it gives you the sense, let's say, of all of these days past. There is something dramatic, of course, we know that, but at the same time, it's the object itself is not. So that's a bit the paradox, let's say, of these 9 years which I lived.
Certainly. And I think also as well, and you pointed something out, which I think is, which I agree with, is that oftentimes I think looking from the outside, it's very tempting to sort of put, artist practitioners in certain boxes and tie them very strongly to kind of an imposed biography. But I think with these works, there's a kind of reassertion of your own biography and your own experience and your own kind of, the sort of the experience of childhood and sort of traces that are left from it, rather than kind of going to sort of the accepted or the kind of the imposed biographies that are often linked to sort of national affiliation and these sorts of things. So it's, and I think that's, for me, one of the very striking things about the work. And there's another work in the exhibition that's The Encounter of the First and Last Particles of Dust, which, unlike the other version of Building a Home with Time, this is does have a kind of spatial component, especially the way that it's hung in B7 Online, which I haven't seen in person. Neither of us have seen in person yet.
Yeah, true.
So we're both observing from a distance in a way. But yeah, this is another work that for me, has there is a kind of biographical element, of course, and a relationship to to childhood as well. And I was wondering if you could just, especially for, I think, the overwhelming majority of people who might be watching this won't have a chance to see the exhibition. So, this is kind of a chance to sort of verbally explore some of these things.
Yes. So the period of time that this work refers to is almost exactly the same as Building a Home with Time. It's a little bit longer. And so you have, as you said, a spatial component, which bears the traces of the space that it was initially in, which was my childhood room in the family house in Lebanon. So, of course, it's very discreet, but you can notice a little bit of yellowing, you can notice little stains, you can really see that the object is not new. So let's say that in that, it already, when it's installed, acts as a filter through which you either watch from the exhibition the outside, or from the outside the exhibition. So it is this filter which is full with all that happened in the space that I just mentioned. And of course, it's also related to what was happening in Lebanon at that time during my childhood, which was the civil war. So let's say that a lot of the times I depart with an autobiographical either story element or object, but then it, of course, it goes further than just my own biography, which stays a bit hidden. So what you have on the surface of this curtain are embroideries. So there are 12 embroideries, 3 per curtain, 4 curtains and 12 embroideries. And they come from memories. So I've established a link between the memory and the way to reach that place or person, rather than looking at the memory as a flashback or an image or a fixed moment in time. So I wanted to trace back, let's say, the memories through the ways, the roads that I used to reach these places and people, and to echo a little bit the memory process, let's say, that when you're digging back for a memory in your mind. So these trajectories correspond to the period when the curtains were installed. So it was from 83 till 95. And they have been retraced. So this is a whole part of the work that you don't see. What you see in the end is patterned, which are scattered on the surface, let's say, as a composition, as a visual composition. And you don't know anymore where the trajectories or the paths start, where they end, in which direction they go, what is their scale exactly, or where I used to go. So this is when I say that I erase my own biography. It's erased in that way somehow to keep the work open. But I will tell you more, a little bit more about it.
Of course.
So the process of retracing them is, so first of all, establishing the memories from that period. So of course, there are several of my works that bear the same title, but for each one, I do the process over again, because somehow every day, let's say, or every year, or at different periods, you might remember different memories. And I always want them to be specific to the work I'm making. So it's not always the same ones that I just use again and again. So first of all, I established these memories, and then I try to find, using Google Maps, but not the roads that we would take today, to remember the paths that we used to make at the time. So let's say between 83 and 95, the roads also changed. And it depended, for example, because I was a child at the time, at which parent would be driving. Maybe they would take different roads. Maybe it was the school bus. And then in the case of this specific pass, it's a very particular one, because we used to go and pick every student. So it's not at all the fastest itinerary, and it's not at all what Google Maps would propose today, let's say. So yeah, there's this whole process of establishing back the roads. Sometimes my memory is not sufficient because I was a child, so I was, let's say, passively transported following these patterns. So I have to ask, to borrow the memory of my parents, of my schoolmates, former schoolmates, and to trace all that back. And then there is the embroidery process. So that is the part that is new, of course, on the curtain. It's kind of an ornamental technique. It's precious, also one. And it comes and highlights a bit. It comes and contrasts, let's say, with the old material of the curtains. This time, in the case of this specific work, it's a bit subtle, because you have the curtains which are transparent already, and then the paths are white on white. So they're a little bit like luminous shadows, or, like as light as memories, let's say, that can also fade back away.
So I find it striking as well how there's a kind of assertion of agency as well. Like, this is, your presence is very much felt, I think, in the fact that you're removing presence in a way. There's a very careful choice, I think, of what to remove and what to retain. And yeah, and I think the sort of valorization that happens in the embroidery process as well, where you're sort of, or valorization or elevation in a way, actually brings us to sort of the next work, which is the Moon Gold series, which I think, and I remember, and this is another work which is a very kind of different scale. These are much smaller kind of photographs, but there's some similar things at play there.
No, you use a term that is very accurate, valorization. In the case of the curtain, the curtains, for example, or any object, used object, let's say worn object, that I extract from my familial circle, let's say, they are nothing but a piece of trash somehow. They are valueless. They don't even have really a sentimental value for me. But with the process that I make them go through, they are extracted from the past. They project the viewer back into their own past, because it's abstract, because they don't have information about where I was going, and because it's not important. but they also project the object itself, the work of art, into the future. So it gives the object a chance, let's say, of surviving and not being just thrown out and entering the art sphere, not as a ready-made, let's say, that leaves the whatever market, supermarket for the art sphere, but more the trash bin or the attic or the cellar or whatever. In the case of the moon gold, it's a bit different because it's a photograph that I make all the time. So it's a series that's been ongoing since 2016, that's been very much interrupted by the pandemic, because it's based on here as well a path that I make very random. I mean, not randomly, but in my daily life. So just to say a little bit what the work is, it's photographs of the moon taken with my cell phone. So I don't carry a camera in my daily displacements. And I just by chance sometimes see the moon. So I started the series by noticing that sometimes I had like a lot of people taking photos of the moon. You see this a lot going on social media. Everybody tries to capture that magical moment when you see it. So it means you're raising your head. You're not looking at the urban context landscape anymore. I decided to do something with it. As at the same time, I had discovered a gold that was called moon gold, and I found it quite beautiful that somebody thought that this was the color of the moon. And by association, I decided to gild the moon on these photographs with that gold. So it's a gold with a little bit of silver. In the European tradition, let's say, gold is associated with the sun and silver with the moon. I don't know if there's a little bit of a hierarchy there, but probably. And here it's gold with a little bit of silver, and it enhances back, as you say, it valorizes the moon again. So I had a feeling that the moon was much more important for us. I mean, not us, you and me, but was much more important in former times. We used to really rely on it for agriculture, sailing, I don't know, cutting your hair, whatever. And today it's just an element of, it's like a decor, you know, it's like totally secondary. We appreciate it when we see it, but if we don't see it, we won't die, you know, and we won't lose track. So I wanted to, highlight it again, give it a shine again. So the gold comes and does that. It also highlights these apparitions in, as I said, mostly urban contexts. So it's mostly in the city, which makes it even more wonderful to see it. But it was also a way to put in relation the moon each time in one of its phases with a location and a time of the day. So you can see that pictures are not always taken at night. It's something we don't think about, but the moon appears at all times of the day or the night. And so in the caption of the work, you always have the location and the exact time when it was taken. And this creates a sort of diary linked to the phases of the moon.
Which in a sense ties it back to the moon's kind of earlier, I guess I don't want to say function, but its sort of role, let's say, which was primarily a way of keep measuring time, you know, the lunar calendar. And I think also as well, it's very difficult to imagine, I think, especially in kind of dense built urban environments, as you mentioned, the urban environment is present, of actually the night sky. The presence, I think, was much more deeply felt, you know. I myself have never seen the night sky in that kind of way, where you can see the Milky Way or celestial objects have a kind of very felt presence. And I think that's largely been taken over by the built environment. You know, we look at our you know, first clocks, and then now, you know, our handheld devices to measure time. So it's almost as though when one sees the moon, it's like there is also an element of something left behind in a way. In a sense, in a way, kind of, maybe this is too loose of an association, but there is something that I feel, for example, with the encounter of the first and last particles of dust, of something that had, you know, a presence in everyday life, and it's sort of, you know, something that could be relegated to the attic or to storage or to the trash in a way. So the moon in a way ceased becoming that thing that sort of accompanies and it's just like you said, sort of an aesthetic thing, something that reminds us of. So taking it and valorizing it and putting it very much in the center of attention, sort of preserves it in a very interesting way.
Yeah, it has to do a little bit also with Caligula and the desire of possessing the moon. So you have them in these little coffret or these little boxes somehow, and it's a kind of collection as well that is established somehow.
Interesting.
Yeah. True about the pollution, the light pollution that prevents you from really looking at that. But I have to say that during the last months when I was in Beirut and we had terrible power cuts and we basically had 2 hours of electricity per day. Oh, and wow. I really appreciated this kind of pollution, I have to say, in the city, at least when you're living there.
Of course, yeah, because then suddenly you can see there's something else that sort of, it becomes visible and becomes felt, despite the unfortunate circumstances. And it's, there is something to it, I think. So I just wanted to jump over to the topic of process. Now you mentioned that some of the materials that you have in your works are kind of very pointedly kind of autobiographical. Some of them are not. But when is there a kind of sort of predetermined process of transforming the material that you have, or is it something that sort of is the material sort of directing the process in a way?
Yeah, I think it depends. It really depends on every work and every object that I decide to interfere with somehow. So no, there's not predetermined process. In the case of it's not a series, but let's say an ensemble of works called The Encounter of the First and Last Particles of Dust, it's always these paths embroidered on different surfaces, such as curtains, a carpet, a quilt, or a blanket. So no, I wouldn't say, I would say that my work is really multimedia, and every time I start a new project or a new series of work, I have to find the appropriate, let's say, shape for it or material. So no, it's not predetermined.
It's almost as though the material has a kind of you know, internally consistent like logic in a way. There's something in it that sort of allows it to sort of emerge in a particular way that's directly specific to that material.
It depends. Sometimes it starts with a material. Sometimes it starts with an object. Sometimes it starts, most of the time, let's say, with an idea. So every time I depart from one of these in order for the work to emerge. And sometimes I also don't find solutions. So I have a beautiful material, a beautiful idea, and it just stays there, stops.
Do you ever revisit sort of older material and older objects or older ideas that that didn't quite come together at a certain point? Does it sort of reemerge, or things, when things are past, they sort of are past?
Yeah, I would say it's past, because you either find the solution, it's like a spark, you know, you find it or you don't. And when you don't, usually years later, it's not much better, and then you're just somewhere else. So of course. No.
In terms of the works that have this kind of, let's say, autobiographical or personal aspect to them, you know, in terms of actually getting sort of distance from the objects or the materials or the memory or trajectories, is that sort of a challenge in sort of producing the works, obtaining that kind of distance, or is that something that isn't even part of the process?
Let's say that actually when the process is over, I can go to something else. So the work can be, let's say, I know that the work will be taken care of. And that's where the title also came from. So it's The Encounter of the First and Last Particles of Dust. When I created this title, I was thinking about the object before it enters your own sphere. So for example, in the case of the curtain, when they were still fabric, and let's say, of course, there was probably dust, but when they were in the shop, the dust was prevented from falling on them because they needed to be sold. And then once they were sold, installed in our house, there's a first particle of dust that came down on them, and that inaugurated their life somehow, the beginning of their life. And then I was imagining the last one that fell on them before they were removed. And the encounter of these two particles of dust somehow. And I also know that now that they are in the art sphere, and you're very well placed to tell me that, dust is also going to be prevented from falling on them. So let's say by after this whole process, when my part of the work is finished, and then I know that the object will have a prolonged life, and this is where maybe I can't take distance, because I know that I've done what I was supposed to do with that object, and now it can go on to living its new life. It's a little bit as if you had a fragment, and that's actually a work I made, which you would, an old fragment with time's patina on it, and then you would break it, and there are new facets that appear. And then these new facets have yet to be covered by time's patina and to live new stories. So that's a little bit what I try to do with my work. I try to make these new facets appear so that they can live new lives. They can escape also this whole history, this whole past, my own biography, and then they can, be something else.
There's a kind of independence of the object as well. It's sort of, yeah.
I don't worry. Let's say I don't worry about the object anymore, not because I don't care, but because I know that now it's not mine anymore somehow as well. I try to, or I want the works to have a kind of playful approach to time. So not to think about time as something dramatic, not to think about time as a linear either, but to be able to play with it in the sense that you could just bring back to the present elements from the past, reactivate them, revisit them, prolong their lives, as I said, and that you wouldn't have to weep, let's say, over the past, because you could just bring it back whenever you wanted and do something new with it. So, of course, in these three works, the time is very present. In Building a Home with Time, they're obviously there. In the encounter of the first and last particles of dust, you have this whole period between the first particle of dust falling and the last one that you see in the material of the curtains, and in the moon gold, whether they're shown isolated, like just one element, or in series. When it's series, it's always time-based series, so of 7, of 30, of presented week and months. So time is, of course, very much here, but they're like a little bit these, let's say, Proustian Madeleines that, as I said, would project you back into your own past, not into mine, but also would be able to project the object towards the future. So that's how I thought about it.
Following the question of time, there's also the question of space, which are obviously quite interrelated. And so one thing that I found quite interesting in sort of the tracing out of trajectories, especially on the encounter of the first and last particles of dust, is there's a kind of subversion of what might be called the kind of cartographic impulse. And I think, in map making, there's often a projection of power. There's sort of this kind of outlining of certain territories and things. And there's something, there's something of that which has a sort of resonance for this, but it's very different. There's a very different kind of impulse in tracing out the trajectories, in sort of the spatial mapping and these kinds of things. And so I was wondering if that kind of question came, could be related to it, like not necessarily power over a territory or over one's life, but that kind of relationship between sort of map making and power in that sense. I was wondering if this
it's true that I used the map is here somehow in all of these works, especially in the works that are the encounter of the first and last particles of dust. Actually, in these works, the map disappears. So the trajectories are then on something that has to be defined in a new space, on a new map, let's say, which is the surface of these other objects that they interact with. And they sometimes, there are patterns on them. Sometimes, as I said, there are traces, there are stains. And these they become a little bit, they could be seen as whatever elements you would have on a map, relief or other paths, or it could be the veins of wood, as I've done in Lebanon. It could be the texture of the curtain, the pattern, whatever. Then let's say that it's very hard in Lebanon actually to use maps. It's very hard to find maps. And I have a huge collection, digital, of maps that I was given. I was not supposed to have it. But let's say that when you want to find a contemporary map, you would not be able, I mean, you would be able to use this as a material, but let's say that a lot of the maps established of Lebanon were established during the French Mandate. So they're totally related to power, to mapping, to an intention behind. The intention behind mapping is never innocent.
Certainly.
Now, of course, this is here in the background, as the whole political and historical layers are in the background of all of these works. This aspect of mapping is here in the background, and it relates to what I'm part of what I'm talking about. But then, yeah, of course, I wanted to use it in a different way of mapping. That you could map memories, you could map emotions, and you could transform. You could abstract the map and transform this path into, as I said, just patterns. So they could escape a little bit all of this context of the map, escape the map, actually. That's a little bit what these works do. But of course, then you could see it also in the moon gold, that it's present in the background. All the works with trajectories, also another work which is not in the show called Digiprint, where it's the photographs of my telephone screen, and it contains also all the GPS navigation. So this is also a map that we now use daily, but it's also, of course, a way of controlling us. So yeah, it's present everywhere in the background, but I try to give a chance to the objects to escape that and to the memories.